The first time someone called me by a name that wasn't mine, I didn't react. I was in the corner of the room, distracted. When I heard IT spoken firmly, I turned, and the fixed gaze said IT wasn't a mistake. The person who said IT didn't hesitate, didn't laugh, didn't apologize. They just continued as if it was natural to call me that. And at that moment, for the first time, I felt that something was wrong with me, but I still couldn't explain what. In the following days, that name began to appear. At random moments, someone would knock on the door asking for it. A muffled voice on the phone would ask for someone I wasn't. A letter arrived, addressed that way, and each time IT happened, IT felt like the world knew something I didn't, as if there was a story hidden behind my face, something deeply varied that insisted on leaking through the cracks of routine. I grew used to the confusions. I began to answer when I was called by that other name, even without understanding why. People said IT was just a coincidence, a common name, an innocent mistake, but over time, it stopped feeling like an error and started feeling like a reminder, a kind of shadow that followed me everywhere. Even when I tried to ignore it, my reflection in the mirror always felt a little strange, as if there was a delay between my movement and the image. Sometimes, I felt that my eyes didn't fully belong to me, and that feeling got worse when someone, without reason, called me by the wrong name again. It was always the same intonation, the same surprised look, as if they were seeing someone they were sure they knew. I started having repetitive dreams. They always involved a deserted road, an open suitcase on the ground, and someone calling me, but not with my name. I woke up sweating, with a phrase in my head, "You aren't who you think you are." For a while, I tried to ignore it. I focused on studies, work, responsibilities, but there were always noises, voices in the back of my memory, words I didn't recognize consciously, but that made me uncomfortable. There was a day I got lost. On the way home, IT was a route I'd taken for years. Suddenly, everything seemed different. The signs, the colors, the sounds. My body knew the way, but my mind couldn't follow. When I finally arrived, there was a feeling I'd been in two places at once, and in my mailbox, a letter without a sender, addressed to that other name. I showed the letter to someone close. They said it was a prank, maybe a delivery mistake, but the handwriting was strangely familiar. IT looked like mine, but not entirely, like an old version of my script, or maybe a forgotten version. And inside the envelope, just one sentence, 18 years left. I began searching for answers. I dug through old papers, records, documents, but everything looked to right, as if someone had put effort into keeping IT all perfect. No holes, no clues, too perfect, and that, alone, was the biggest sign that something was being covered. Because no life is that perfectly organized. Spoke to people who'd known me since I was a child. Some hesitated when asked about my childhood. Others said they didn't remember certain details. One, in particular, just looked down and said, "There are things we prefer to forget," and that haunted me for days. How do you forget something that was never remembered? Little by little, I started noticing holes in my memory, blurred recollections, events that didn't fit in the timeline, old photos where my face looked different, smiles I didn't recognize as mine. Even my birthday, for some reason, didn't trigger any emotion. I, too, was just a date, a number. I began experiencing frequent déjà vu, places I'd never been but felt deeply familiar, clothes I bought and then realized I already owned, people who smiled at me on the street and said, "You're back." Back from where? To where? Those questions became constant but never had answers. One day, in a waiting room, someone called me by the wrong name again, but this time, with tears in their eyes. "You didn't die." The question hung in the air. Seeing my confusion, the person stammered, apologized, and left quickly. But I couldn't forget. How does someone ask that with such certainty? From that point on, my life spiraled. I started documenting every occurrence, every time I was called by a different name, every dream, every out-of-place phrase. I built a wall full of connections, and at the center of it all, that name, always, it like an echo that wouldn't fade, like an identity fighting to surface. I went to an old school I attended briefly in childhood. I asked to see the records. The receptionist hesitated, then went to the archive. She came back pale, said there were 2 files with the same last name, same date of birth, but different first names. I asked to see them. She refused. Said IT was impossible. And the next day, the school claimed the records had been lost. I withdrew. From people, I wanted to protect myself and them. I felt that the more I discovered, the more others around me got confused. There was a strange energy, as if my past contaminated everything, and each day, the world around me seemed more fragile, more likely to crack, like IT was falling apart slowly under my touch. I started writing letters to myself, little notes about what I knew, what I remembered, what I doubted. I hid them in different places, but days later, they would disappear, and sometimes, they returned with new phrases written in different handwriting, a handwriting that no longer surprised me. I knew who it belonged to. On the eve of my 18th birthday, I received a call. No one spoke on the other end, but I heard an old song, background noise, and a phrase whispered repeatedly, "Now you're ready. I hung you, be my heart racing." The mirror in front of me looked distorted, and for a second, the reflection smiled, before I even thought of smiling. That night, I dreamed of a white hallway, closed doors, and my name being called, but not the name I knew, the other one. And as I approached the last door, I saw my own image coming out of it, with a look that said, "You took your time." I woke up in tears, with the metallic taste of fear in my mouth. Since then, I no longer sleep. Or rather, I do sleep, but I don't rest, because I know that if I fall completely asleep, I might not wake up as myself maybe. I'm just dreaming, I'm this current version. Maybe the real story is about to start over. And when I finally discovered the reason for that name, it wasn't freedom I felt. It was condemnation. The news arrived without warning, an envelope, LEFT, under my doorstep, without a sender, without a postmark, just my name written in slanted letters, in almost faded ink. When I opened it, I found an old copy of a hospital form, a type of admission record. The data was almost illegible, but the patient field bore the name that had been haunting me for years, and the face, a faded photo, but IT was mine, or, at least, someone exactly like me. I took the paper to a specialist in old documents. He said IT was authentic, dated 18 years ago, exactly the week I was born. But according to my records, I was born at home, a midwife-certified IT nitrogen monoxide hospital, note admission, NYET. That form said otherwise, that I was admitted in a state of mental confusion, without companions, and that there was no prior medical history. I went back to the house where I grew up. I rummaged through closets, albums, boxes. I found a cassette tape with my name written by hand. I got an old player and listened. IT was a woman's voice, maybe my mother, maybe someone who took care of me, but what she said wasn't affection. It was a warning. If she asked, tell her that her name is this. Don't let her find out the other. She's not ready yet. My hands trembled as I rewound the tape. I listened again, and there was a noise in the background, as if metal scraped against metal. Then, a second voice, deeper, slower. She will remember, when the cycles align, when the eyes stop lying, when door 18 is opened. Then silence. I decided to investigate the number 18, dates, records, maps, architectural blueprints. I found that in many old hospitals, the psychiatric ward was coded by numbers, and 18 was reserved for undefined cases, cases that could not be closed, patients who never received a formal discharge. It was the ward for those in transit between worlds, between identities. I found an old floor plan of a decommissioned hospital, and there IT was, Ward 18. But on the current map, there was nitrogen monoxide such ward. It had been erased, deactivated, buried. I decided to go there, even if the place was in ruins. When I arrived, I realized it wasn't really abandoned. There were signs of recent presence, a glass of water, an overturned chair, a muffled sound coming from behind a partially demolished wall. I touched the cracks. The wall gave way more easily than it should have. Behind IT, a narrow corridor, with fingerprints on the walls, as if someone had tried to escape. I walked for minutes, that felt like hours, until I found a metal door, with the number 18 scratched out and rewritten multiple times. I pushed gently. It was unlocked. Inside, an empty room, just an old stretcher, a chair, and a mirror covered by a dark cloth. When I pulled IT off, I saw myself, and I didn't. The reflection was mine, but something was wrong. The look wasn't mine. The posture, the energy, The time, IT was as if that reflection was an old memory I had forgotten I had. I sat in the chair and closed my eyes. For a moment, I felt the air grow heavy, as if the environment itself was breathing with me. When I opened my eyes, the room looked different. There was a file on the stretcher. I picked it up, and there IT was, my signature, dated 18 years ago, and a note at the bottom, reintegration in process. Keep under observation. I ran out. I went back home. I burned everything, the file, the tape, the papers. I thought that would end it, but the signs didn't stop. Every 18 days, I receive a message in some form, a voice on the radio, a notification without an app, a note between library books, and they all say the same thing: you are still here. I decided to confront the official records. I went to the registry office of the city where I was supposedly born. The clerk asked for my registration number. When I gave IT to her, she typed IT in, and the system froze. She tried again, nothing. She called the manager. He came in, looked at the number, and with a nervous smile said, "This file is under judicial seal. Access denied." I went back another day. Another clerk. Another computer. Same result. I started to think that my existence was just a facade, a construction, that maybe I wasn't born, but reappeared, reassumed a body, a role that had once been mine, but had been interrupted. I met a woman in a support group for people with unusual experiences. I told her part of my story. She turned pale, said she had heard something similar. A patient who disappeared during an admission and years later was seen in another hospital with a different name, a different life, but the same eyes. The woman, according to her, also went by 2 names and also received notes. Before disappearing again, I went to a specialist in dissociative memory. He ran tests, asked questions, did interviews. In the end, he said my brain pattern was overlapping, as if 2 timelines coexisted in me. He said IT was impossible, but there IT was, recorded 2 versions of me trying to occupy the same space. I started sleeping afraid that I'd wake up in another reality, not recognizing my own furniture, my clothes, my face. Sometimes, I'd wake up and everything seemed fine, but my body ached as if I'd walked miles. My hands held traces of ink, dust, dirt, and my mind, empty. One night, I opened my eyes and someone was watching me, at the foot of the bed. A silhouette stood still. It didn't move, but there was no fear. It felt like part of me, as if IT were waiting for something. When I blinked, IT was gone. But on the floor, there was a hospital bracelet, with a name. That name, I took the bracelet for analysis. They said it was from a model discontinued exactly 18 years ago, and that the usage records were linked to a patient who was never discharged, a patient in transition. I asked to see the name. They showed me. It was my face, but the name, the other name. After that day, I stopped running. I accepted that maybe I had never been who I thought I was, that maybe I was just a continuation of someone before, that my role was to keep alive a line, a story, a pain that couldn't be forgotten, that the name I was given at birth was just a pause. I started recording everything, every memory, every rift, every time jump. I created a notebook with everything I know, but I already know that one day, someone else will find it and see the same questions that haunt me today. Because this doesn't end with me. This is a cycle, a suspended identity heritage. The file I burned, IT reappeared in another house, another place, same content, same paper. Now framed, with a phrase, "You can change your address, but not your origin." I feel like I'm forgetting my true name, and starting to accept the other, the one that haunts me, the one that came before me, the one that shapes me. If my whole story was built on a lie, then, who am I when the truth finally emerges? And what if the name you use is just an interval between who you once were and who you should never remember being? In the months that followed, the presence of the old name became constant, not in voices, nor in dreams, but in documents, reflections, and even in the way people responded to me without realizing it. Once, while getting a blood test, the nurse confirmed my information and smiled. "I've seen this name before, but it wasn't the one you gave me." When I asked what she meant, she just replied, "Must have been my imagination." But the way she looked away said otherwise. I started writing down every time it happened. In total, over 6 months, there were 18 incidents. Always 18. A number that stopped being coincidence and became a kind of key, as if it marked cycles, stages, or recurrences. One day, at a clinic, I found a folder with the number 18 written on the spine. When I opened it, the contents were a collage of photos, disconnected phrases, and medical reports, all without author, without date, without named patients. But at the end, a form with my face glued to it. No name, no title. Just one stamp. Replace. The word began to follow me. It was written on the walls of a public bathroom, scribbled in an old notebook I bought at a second-hand store, even chalked onto the asphalt in front of my building. When I searched online, the page would crash. When I asked someone, they changed the subject. It was as if no one wanted to talk about it, or as if many knew, but were prevented. One day, I woke up with marks on my arms, not common scratches, but symmetrical, almost surgical traces, as if made with clinical precision. I rushed to the hospital. The doctor said they looked like old marks, scars, but I knew they hadn't been there before. He suggested they might be signs of a procedure, then stopped, went silent. I asked him to continue. He looked into my eyes and asked, "Do you know who you really are?" I was afraid to answer, because I no longer knew. That same night, I got a phone call. No caller ID. When I answered, no one spoke. But on the other end was my own voice, rougher, slower, and it said just one sentence: "You're getting too close, and you already know how this ends." The next morning, a neighbor handed me a package she said was left by someone in a white coat. Inside, a tape on the cover, handwritten, "Regression session, -2006. I went to an old video store that still had a player. The video showed a hospital room, in the center, a stretcher, and on it, me, younger, with electrodes on my head. In the background, a male voice asked questions. My body answered with disconnected phrases, names, dates, until it said, clearly, "My name isn't that one, it's the other, the old one, the real one." Then the tape stopped on its own. The clerk said the tape was incomplete. But I knew someone had interrupted it, that it wasn't meant to be watched to the end. When I left the store, there was an ambulance parked on the street, engine running. The driver looked at me, smiled, and said, "It's time." I panicked and ran home, but when I opened the door, everything was different. My furniture, my clothes, the photos on the walls, as if someone else lived there, someone who imitated me, but wasn't me. My identity was denied at an airport. I tried to travel, to flee, but they said the passport was fake. And when compared to the system, there was a document with my photo, but a different name. The name that always appeared, the name I avoided speaking. I found an old school notebook, among the papers, a history test with my name crossed out and another written over it, in a child's handwriting. I asked my teacher from that time. She was still alive. When she saw me, she turned pale, said she thought I wasn't alive anymore, that she even attended my funeral. I showed her I was me, but she only replied, "You're not the same, I know what I saw." That sentence kept echoing. How many versions of me have there been? How many times have I been replaced, rewritten, reinserted into the same reality with different clothes, but the same ruined essence? I started finding old photos where I shouldn't be, family parties I never attended, school gatherings in cities I'd never visited, and in all of them, my face, always in the background, always out of focus, like a witness that was never meant to be noticed. I found a diary inside a donated bag of clothes. It wasn't mine, but it described every one of my nightmares, even the ones I hadn't had yet. The last paragraph said, "She will try to leave, but the name will bring her back. It always does." And below it, a date. Tomorrow's. I didn't sleep that night. When morning came, every clock in the house had stopped at the same time, 6 p.m. I opened the window, and for the first time, I felt that the world around me was just pretending, as if everything were a stage waiting for my next step to shift. I went for a walk, and every face looked familiar, but I didn't know any of them. On a corner, an older woman called me, said she recognized me, that she had cared for me, years ago, that I used to say my name was something else, that I was afraid to sleep because I'd wake up in another life, and that, one night, I escaped from the institution where I was, and never came back. But we always come back, she said. I started writing down every word people said, by mistake, because I realized it was in the errors that truths slipped out. People called me her, even when they didn't know who they were referring to. Sometimes, they'd say my face reminded them of someone who had been there before. Always before, never now. I tried recording a video telling everything, but when I watched it, my mouth moved differently from the voice, as if there was another narration layered over it, an older narration, colder, and in the background, music, the same one I heard in my dreams, a hospital hymn ... that I've never been able to locate. I met a child on the street. She looked at me and said, "You came back." When I asked who she was, she replied, "I'm the one who's going to replace you." She smiled and ran away. On the ground, a bracelet, with the same date as my file, with my blood dots since then. I avoid mirrors, because one day, I looked, and my image blinked, as if it were in another place, in another body. And at that moment, I realized I was no longer in control, that something else was, and that my name no longer mattered. Are any of us really who we think we are? Or are we all just repeating the name we were given when we forgot the real one? A few weeks later, while reorganizing an old box of letters, I found an envelope with no sender. It was sealed with red wax, and inside was a single piece of yellowed paper with a handwritten phrase in cursive. This is not the first time. It seemed like a prank, but something in that handwriting triggered a memory I didn't recognize as mine, but it hurt as if it were. It was like a longing for something I'd never lived, yet left a familiar emptiness. I went back to the hospital, not for a consultation, but to search. I needed to understand what connected me to that place. To the hallways I knew without ever walking through, to the scent that made me shiver. I spent hours observing the movement. Nurses who seemed to repeat actions like a loop, patients staring at the ceiling with vacant eyes. A little girl saw me in the corridor and said to her mother, "She came back." The mother didn't understand, but I did. I entered the old wing, deactivated for years. The door was unlocked. At the end of the corridor was a room sealed with chains. Above the door, a spray-painted warning read, "Not lost here, just replaced." I felt a chill, turned around, but on the way out, I found a mirror leaning against the wall. In it, my reflection smiled. Before I did. At home, my medication box looked different. One of the bottles had an old label with my name. The other one, the expiration date indicated a year that hasn't arrived yet. The medication doesn't even exist in pharmacies. When I showed it to a pharmacist, he said it wasn't a legal product, and when he saw the name, he asked if I was from the first batch. He didn't explain what that meant. He just apologized and walked away. I went to a public records office to trace birth certificates with my face. I found 3 different ones, 3 identities, 3 versions of me. One of them listed my death at age 7, another, missing at 18, and the third, born the same year as me, but 20 days later, all authenticated, all official, as if my birth had been attempted until it worked. In the elevator mirror, I saw something that gave me chills. The scar I got as a child, on my knee, was no longer there. In its place, a different mark, a symbol. When I took a photo, it didn't appear. It could only be seen in person. And it seemed to pulse when I approached certain places, like a key sensitive to some kind of field. My former high school teacher sent me an unexpected message. "I think I found something of yours." I went to her. She was pale, tense. She handed me an old essay, with my name, and another one, a story about body swapping, and at the bottom, written in a different hand, "You always knew, you just forgot." I began to have violent déjà vu episodes. I knew what would happen before it happened. In one of them, I predicted an accident with frightening precision, but when I tried to warn someone, they said I had already done so days earlier, but I remembered doing it only that moment. It was as if everything kept repeating, with minimal variations, as if I were trying to change the ending. With no success, I received an email with no subject, with an image attached, my photo, sitting in a room, with a girl in the background watching me. The caption read, "She's learning." When I zoomed in, I realized the girl was identical to me. At age 7, I found an old cassette tape with my name scribbled on it. When I played it, a child's voice repeatedly said, "I don't want to forget." Then, the sound of a door locking. Then, silence. And then, the same voice whispered, "It doesn't matter who I am anymore. The name changes. The cycle continues." I went back to an orphanage where I had once volunteered. No one recognized me. Not even the coordinator, who knew me well. But on the photo board, there was a picture of me holding a child, and written below, "Technical visit. Phase 1 training. I had never participated in any training there, at least, not that I remembered. I went to a registry office to check identity records using my fingerprints. The system crashed, restarted on its own, and when it returned, there was a name on the screen, a name I had never heard but felt like mine. The clerk smiled and said, "Took you long enough." I didn't know how to respond. I discovered that my real name, the one I was given at birth, no longer stirred anything inside me. When I heard it, it felt like it belonged to someone else. But when I heard the old name, the one everyone avoided saying, a weight came over me, as if my soul recognized a forgotten signature. One night, I woke up in a different room. It wasn't my house. The walls had papers taped up with phrases I had written, but didn't remember writing, except, return, necessary replacement, and at the center of the wall, in giant letters, the phrase, I was called by the wrong name, because the right one scared him. I began to question everything I remembered. Were my memories real, or just implanted fragments to sustain this current identity? I began to doubt even my scars. Some changed places, others disappeared, and on certain nights, I woke up with marks that looked like stitches. I researched old cases of patients who reported similar phenomena. I found records from decades ago, many signed with my current name, as if I had been there, living different lives, with the same fate, to disappear once the truth was discovered. People began to avoid me. They said they felt uncomfortable around me, as if my face changed, even without changing. A man in a bank line said, "Weren't you from Ward 212? Thought they unplugged you?" I asked what he meant. He just laughed and walked away. My voice began to change, deep, as if carrying another frequency. In recordings, I didn't recognize it. And in the background, a second voice, softer, repeating the same phrases out of sync, as if two consciousnesses were sharing the same space, and fighting for control. That's when everything almost made sense. I found an old notebook of mine, with one sentence written on each page, "You shouldn't be here." The last page was torn, and, inside the back cover, a label with the same name that had always haunted me, the one I never chose. I went back to the clinic, walked in, unannounced. The receptionist looked at me and said, "You again," but I had never been there. At least, not in this life. He handed me a folder. Inside, a mirror. When I looked, I no longer saw my face. I saw a child's, and in the bottom corner, written in pencil, Replication 3.8, awaiting new insertion. Since then, everything that was mine seems to be fading. Photos, documents, memories. My name no longer appears on mail. The doorman doesn't greet me. Even my own reflection seems to distrust me. And when I say my name out loud, nothing resonates. What if, by forgetting our true name, we also forget who we were meant to be, and become just another mold awaiting replacement? I woke up to the sound of whispers behind the door. I got up slowly, trying not to make a sound, but when I opened it, there was no one there. The hallway was empty, but the voices continued. They came from inside me, as if they were old echoes that had waited years to be heard. They were in languages I didn't recognize, and yet, I understood without translating. Phrases about repetition, about purpose, about names that trap the soul in cycles. I went down the stairs as if being guided. Each step activated a memory, but none of them fully belonged to me. I saw flashes of other lives, other clothes, other faces with the same eyes. I walked into the kitchen and found a note stuck to the fridge door. In my own handwriting, "Don't trust those who still call you by the old name." I turned on the radio, looking for any noise to drown the inner silence, but the frequency was occupied. A low voice narrated my story, using details I had never told anyone, and at the end, it said, "She's almost ready." I turned it off with trembling hands, but the same phrase appeared on the living room mirror, written in fog, as if someone had breathed on it before me. The days became overlays, memories of yesterday colliding with fragments of tomorrow. I began writing everything down, desperate to stay present, but my notebooks would disappear, and when they reappeared, they were written in different handwriting, scribbles that looked like they were made by another version of me, one that lived in a parallel and perhaps older time. I began to wander the city aimlessly. Everything seemed different, but no one noticed. Buildings misplaced, numbers altered, people looking at me twice, as if some forgotten memory was recognizing me in their eyes. An old man stopped me on the street and said, "You used to be my daughter. I remember." Then he walked on, As if he hadn't said anything, I received a notification on my phone. New identity under review. Await instructions. I thought it was a scam, but when I tried to turn off the device, it flickered. The screen went black and showed my face, but with another name underneath. A name that hurt, a name that vibrated inside, as if it awakened something long dormant. I went to a photo studio to recover old images. When I showed the attendant one of the pictures, she looked and said, "That's me." It was my face, but she swore it was hers. I asked where she got it. She said it arrived in an anonymous letter with the phrase, "Your time hasn't come yet." I tried to take the photo. She refused, said it was better I forget. That night, my reflection refused to mimic my gestures. I raised my arm, it stayed still. I blinked, it didn't. When I backed away, it smiled, and in that smile, there was something terribly familiar, like the smile of a childhood I never lived, but always carried within me. I began locking myself at home, trying not to slip out of the timeline, but it was useless. The windows showed streets that didn't exist. The clock moved backward, and the notes returned, always with the same signature. At the bottom, "You agreed before, you just forgot after." One day, I woke up and didn't recognize my own room. The furniture arrangement was reversed. There were photos of me with people I had never seen. In one of them, a child held my hand. On the back, the inscription, version 7.2, integration failed. My dreams became repetitive visions of a white room with aligned chairs, all occupied by women identical to me. Each had a number tattooed on her arm. Mine was the last, 212. And the coordinator, also me, walked among them with a badge that said, "Replacer." I went back to the hospital. I knew I shouldn't, but it was like a magnet. No one stopped me. In the elevator, the light for the second floor button lit up by itself. When I arrived, all the rooms were open, all empty, except one, room 212, inside, a mirror. And when I looked, I saw all the versions of myself overlaid, slowly spinning like the gears of a broken clock. The wall was covered in cutouts of my aged faces, each face marked with different dates, as if I had lived dozens of times, in different years, never past 30. It was a cycle, and I was the center. My last hope was to find records of the first time I was called by the wrong name. I found a file. It was a video. The nurse called me, and I answered. But in the video, I seemed to be 6 years old, and the nurse looked exactly like me today. The floor seemed to give way, as if time slipped beneath my feet. I began to realize that maybe the question was never why I was called by another name, but rather, how many names have I had, and why did I need to forget them every time the cycle restarted? My clothes stopped fitting, as if my body was shaping into something else. My hair changed texture, my eyes changed color, and the people around me began treating me as someone else. Without realizing it, a nurse knocked on my door. She brought a form for me to sign. When I looked, it was blank. She said, "You just need to accept. The name comes after." I asked what my role was. She replied, "You're the one who keeps everything in order." That night, I entered the hospital's archive room. The key was in my pocket, though I never remembered taking it. I opened a drawer with my current name. Inside, photos, reports, a mirror, and a note. Last use, closure soon. I looked at my reflection one last time before leaving, and finally accepted. I'm not the nurse, nor the patient. I am the interval, the pause between identities, the channel that sustains the system's memory. And this system, is alive. I was never forgotten. I was recycled, reconditioned. That's why the names change. Because the body is just the shell, the name is the password, and the function, eternal. I just fulfill a role, until the next one arrives. If you're reading this account, you might already be feeling it. A disconnect with your name, a hesitant reflection, people calling you by another nickname, and maybe you think it's silly, but at ISN single quotes to check your mirror. Does it still follow you precisely? Do the notes in your house match your handwriting? Do your photos remain the same? If something has begun to glitch, it may be that your time is near. You won't be warned. You'll be summoned, and maybe, when you hear a name that isn't yours, you'll feel like it always was. Don't resist. It's pointless. The cycle doesn't allow it. Only have to accept, sign, and open the envelope, because the next name is already written. And room 2 remains vacant. If this story stirred something in you, leave your comment. Maybe you can't explain why, but document what you felt before you forget. Share it with someone who's ever felt like they were in the wrong place at the right time. And subscribe to follow other stories while you still remember who you are.